Hello everyone, welcome to week 9. There's only 2 weeks after this, so we're really heading down the home stretch right now. This week is going to be a follow-up to the discussion board we had last week, where you read Matthew's article where he defended teaching to the test, and of course that's if the test is a good test. He talked about what's the difference between teaching to, say, our state assessments, New York State assessments, which reflect our standards, or teaching to your own teacher-made test. Now, my contention is that teachers don't teach to their teacher-made tests. They create them after they teach. And this is an issue that I have, and we will see in the 2 weeks following the last 2 weeks of this course, when we talk about classroom assessment, that what we need to do, or what I would recommend and what many of the experts recommend, is that we create our assessments first. And that doesn't necessarily mean a pencil and paper test that we create first, but that should be created first as well. So you know what you're going to test, you let the kids know what you're going to test, and then you teach to it, and it should reflect the standards. So that's one of the reasons that I chose this textbook, Popham's textbook, is because it's one of the only ones that I know about that it really addresses the question of test prep, which is a hot topic today, and everybody has heard or seen the mindless test prep that can go on in some classrooms because administrators think or believe or are ignorant of any other way to increase achievement. So they make teachers, for 2 or 3 weeks prior to the exam, make the kids do mindless test prep. So, wow, is that a way to turn kids off? Yeah, I think so. So that's what we're going to talk about this week, and we'll also have another discussion board about it, because there are things teachers can do to not give kids stress and to relieve stress. Okay, this week's agenda, we're going to talk about test anxiety, test monsters, etc. We're going to talk about appropriate and inappropriate test prep practices. Some of you have already mentioned these in the previous discussion board. You've read ahead. And then we'll talk about one teacher who wrote about teaching to the test, and that's it. I wanted to remind everybody that you are supposed to be filling out your vocabulary in your own words. I'm going to be collecting that and grading it. So we've had a vocabulary quiz already, so you should have what I consider the definitions from that quiz. I think about half the words. And so make sure you're continuing to fill in. One of the things I've found in this course is that people have priorities, so they put things that aren't due, they put them off, and then they rush through them the week before they're due just to get the course over with. And I've received some pretty bad vocabulary in your own words, so be doing that as you go along. It's much easier that way. Okay. As part of your discussion board, I want you, there's a USA Today article, or I believe it was in USA Today, I'm not positive, but there's an article called Toughening Up for the Tests, and it's about part of the article is about teachers creating these test monsters, which you see the picture of there, to help kids relieve stress. There's also a USA Today article that talks about teachers and how they're relieving stress today, and a National Education Association Today article that also talks about things you can do to relieve stress in testing situations. And here's a question. Now, I don't have a discussion board specifically on this because I want you to incorporate this into the one discussion board that I do have. Because anxiety is usually a self-imposed infliction, this is my opinion, of course, Are there strategies or practices that teachers can use to reduce test anxiety? And should we be teaching them along with other test prep activities? Why or why not? I know when I taught this live, I had a phys ed teacher in my class, and I mentioned the practice of yoga, which I do and I think is wonderful. And I said, wouldn't this be great to teach kids some yoga as part of phys ed class? And oh, did he scoff at me? And I thought, oh, you know, what is wrong with this picture? I mean, why wouldn't we want to teach yoga in phys ed class? I mean, it's something kids can take part in through their whole adult lives, rather than be playing basketball, which maybe a handful of us will continue doing the rest of our lives. Well, one of the things that I was always big on when I was a high school principal was trying to get my teachers to teach things that kids would be involved in the rest of their lives, lifelong activities. Isn't that what we want? You know, teach kids about nutrition, how to eat well, how to stay healthy, how to do an exercise regime, all kinds of things like that kids will be involved in, or can be involved in. So anyway, I just shook my head, and the rest of the class pretty much attacked this guy. You know, a phys ed teacher saying yoga's not a phys ed activity, an appropriate one. So anyway, so read these 3 articles, and you know, it's food for thought, and then we'll put everything together when we get to our discussion board, and I'll talk about that more at the end of this presentation. When we talk about high stakes testing, and No Child Left Behind has made pretty much all of our assessments high stakes because they are published in the paper, they are used for accountability purposes. Low performing schools, as we heard from my No Child Left Behind presentation, receive certain consequences, and after so many years it could mean dissolving the school. So so they're here to stay. I mean, people, believe it or not, we may not like them and the pressure they put on us, but the public likes them. They shine a spotlight on us. They get to compare schools. They get to see how their school is doing compared to other schools, or compared to similar schools. Now, the similar schools comparison that the state does I think is a valid exercise. So we're comparing schools with the same size, the same demographics, the same poverty level. It's a free lunch, number of kids getting free lunch, or percentage of kids getting free lunch. We're comparing schools that are like each other. So you're not comparing Scarsdale with Rhinebeck High School, okay, because they're 2 different places. So anyway, I think it's going to be a long time before we get out of the high stakes assessment business. One of the things that Alfie said in his rage or rant, or as some of you called it, is that tests aren't a part of life. They're not real life. We don't encounter tests. But the reality is we do encounter these tests. We encounter them all the time. You folks have taken some already and will take more. The CSTs on disability, the CST multi-subject, the LAST, the ASTW. So almost every profession, every white-collar profession, even blue-collar professions, have certification or entrance examinations that people have to take. So we will always have these kind of tests, and who would want to hire a lawyer who hadn't passed the New York State bar exam, or a doctor who hadn't passed his medical boards? So it's a gateway activity to screen people that don't at least have the minimal amount of knowledge to succeed in the profession. So we have these tests, and we will continue to have them. Because of our state assessments, when it was always a specialized field, the private sector has taken over. I mean, the public sector has taken over some of the test prep that used to be reserved for SAT prep classes like Kaplan and businesses and corporations like that, who used to prepare kids for the SATs or the GREs or Miller Analogies, which was another college entrance test. But now test prep is going on in our classrooms. And it's not necessarily the same kind of test prep that these corporations are doing. It's test prep that isn't ethical or isn't good for kids. Let's talk about some test prep guidelines that Popham mentions in his chapter on test prep. The first one he mentions is professional ethics, and we all know what that is. That's cheating. And there are some teachers that cheat and don't even know it. A couple years ago, in my old school district, I used to work I was an assistant principal in the Bethlehem Central School District. A teacher took a pilot exam and made copies of it. Now, we all know now from what we've read that when the state is creating exams, they pilot them first. So they use the IRT to compare test questions to see their level of difficulty. So that's item response theory. So we're piloting exams all the time. So we're throwing some questions out and we're adding new questions every year. So on that pilot test, there could be, and probably will be, questions that will be on the next assessment. So in Bethlehem, a teacher made a copy of the pilot exam and probably innocently thinking, oh, I can use this for preparing my kids next year. Well, that's what she did. She used it in her class the next year, and there was a bunch of questions that were on the test. So my guess is that teacher got fired, knowing the superintendent in Bethlehem. that is something that is unethical. I mean, and you need to know that, because you'll risk your own future. I mean, what Popham talks about in his chapter is using the same form test, which is how you would get that. You would break into the guidance office, I guess, and get a copy of the test and use it to prepare your kids. So that's unethical. That'll get you fired. So don't do it. The other one is a little bit touchier. It's what he calls educational defensibility, and how he defines that is that you can't falsely increase what we would call a false positive, that you're increasing kids' test scores, but you're not increasing their mastery. Excuse me. So that's how he talks about educational defensibility. And so he uses that when he talks about some of the different practices, which I'll talk about after this. What I thought was interesting was this blowing the whistle. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Was this blowing the whistle? This was taken from a survey done in 1991, and it was done asking teachers if they have witnessed any of these inappropriate testing practices. Now, notice it says several inappropriate testing practices right up here, often or frequently in their school. And you can see you would expect these to be smaller: changing a student's answer, giving students the answer. And now I have heard of resource room teachers doing this when a kid has separate location accommodations, and you know how you can give, especially if you're reading the test to a student, by emphasizing, is it A, is it B, is it C? And you read the answer. So there are ways to do it and fool yourself into believing you're not cheating. And you'll notice the bottom one here, giving practices on passages highly similar to those in the test. And this is 30% who said they often or frequently saw people doing this. Now, what do you think that percentage would be now? I would guess in the 90s, 95. Almost everyone does this. Now, is this right? Well, I'll talk more about it later when I go over all the test prep practices. But I think teaching test taking as a literacy genre, like fiction, like nonfiction, poetry, prose, those are all genres of literacy. Reading tests should be it should be looked at as another form of literacy, and we should teach kids. And most schools are doing this. How do you take tests? How do you read questions? How do you throw out the least obvious, etc., etc. What's good guessing? Things like that. Of course, the when in doubt, choose C. I wouldn't be pushing that, but I've often heard that from some of my students. But anyway, so I am going to stop here and splice this into the second half. I think I'll make it all one presentation so you can get it over with in one setting. This is a short presentation this week, and I'm mainly interested in your responses on the discussion board, because there isn't going to be a DEJ this week. Okay, I'll be back shortly. Okay, welcome back. Here are some test prep practices that are most often seen in schools today. The first is using a previous form of the test. Most of us do this and feel that it is important for students to get used to the format of and the way questions are asked on tests given in previous years. We all have used SAT Prep or LAST Prep guides prior to taking the test. I wonder what Popham feels about these practices. Okay, the second is using a current test form to prepare students. This would be similar to making a copy of a pilot exam, a pilot test that the state gives in your school the year before some of those questions appeared on the exam. Okay, this happened in 2007, last year, in Bethlehem, a school district in which I used to work. A teacher Xerox copies of the pilot exam that the state was doing with the fourth graders the previous year, and used it to prepare her students for the 2007 exam. Okay, many of the questions on that pilot exam were on the test that was given. That's why they give pilot exams, to pilot questions that there, as we know, are going to be, that may be used in a future form of that test. So that's highly unethical. I'm sure the teacher didn't think she was doing anything, he or she, I don't know if it was he or she, was doing anything wrong, but my guess is that teacher was fired because that is a no-no. So you need to know that if you get a pilot test, you're piloting a test, which not all teachers get to do and not all classrooms do, but if you do, that test is highly secure. You cannot copy any of that. So if you want to keep your job, don't mess with the pilot exam. All right. The third type of test prep practice are general test taking strategies. Okay. Now, in other words, teaching students how to when to guess, do the easy ones first, etc., etc. To me, this also makes sense to fuse into the day-to-day teaching that goes on in the classroom. But how will Popham feel about that? We'll see. The next test prep strategy is using the same format practice. Okay, that's using the same form of problem that you will believe will be on the test. Say if the assessment has all multiple choice questions, then that's all you give your students. No essay, no constructed response, because they won't be on the test. Personally, I have a problem with this strategy, mainly because we need to expose students to multiple types of assessments, as well as multiple ways that a problem may be given. So I have a feeling that Popham just might agree with me on this one. Okay, and the last one is using a varied format as practice for the test. With this strategy, You may use the same format that you expect to see on the test, but not exclusively. Popham used the example of giving students addition problems in both horizontal as well as vertical form, even though you know that there will only be one type on the exam. All right, so let's see how Popham feels about each of these practice. Okay, using a previous form of the test. Okay, something that we all do and something that Dr. Tom thinks is okay occasionally. Popham says no. Do not use previous forms of the test, and you can read his reasons why when you read chapter 14. But he doesn't think this should do. And I think in moderation it's okay, just to get kids used to what the test looks like. But doing it constantly, having kids take previous forms of the test constantly, I think that's what Popham's talking about. That kills kids. Okay, using a current form of the test, I think you all know what that's going to be. Yes, that is illegal. You will get fired if you use a current form of the test, if you get hold of one. I don't know how you would get hold of one, but maybe you know somebody in state ed. I don't know. Okay, general test taking strategies. Ming, 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 ming. Yes, he thinks that's okay, and I agree. To get kids to know when to pass, to go through it, take the ones you know, and then go back and do the ones that you had trouble with. And how about same format practice? No. And I would agree that because there's only going to be one kind of question on the test, only giving kids those kind of questions, like the addition problem that I mentioned, vertical and horizontal, that's not good. Very test prep format. Ning, 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 ning. Yes, he feels that is acceptable, as do I. Okay, let's move on to teaching to the test. I thought Popham gave us an interesting perspective on the commonly heard term of teaching to the test. We read what Jay Matthews from the Washington Post had to say about it, and we'll read this week, at the end of this session, what a first-year teacher felt about it as well. Popham separates the phrase into two distinguishable parts. One he believes is okay, the other he doesn't. The first type of teaching to the test is what many schools promote, teaching to the items on the test. These strategies have students taking practice test after practice test in the weeks or even months leading up to the exam. Many of you have talked about this or wrote about it in the discussion board. Not only does this artificially inflate test scores, students get higher results than they should because they haven't really mastered the content, but it deadens young people's desire to learn. And you all know that. Intuitively, you know that. Giving kids tests over and over again. What are you doing in school today, honey? We took tests, practice tests. I hate school. And you can't blame them. If school is just about taking tests, and not about learning for learning's sake, what a terrible experience we're exposing our students to. To me, this is the worst thing we can do to the vibrant and curious minds of our youth. And I think you all agree. And this is what leaves a bad taste in your mouth about standardized tests. It may not be the tests themselves that you're upset about, but it's what your administrators are forcing you to do. And I know, Lacey, you say you observe this in a lot of schools. Well, I've been in a lot of schools upstate. Okay, now I think that's the difference. I've worked upstate, and this is not the way the schools I've been associated with function. Okay, the kids are not being test prepped constantly. Anyway. If you have or believe the state has created what Popham refers to as instructionally illuminated tests, then if you teach to the curricular aim represented by the test items, students will not only master the content that you want them to, but they also should do well in the test. One of our goals as educators is to make sure our state exams are of the instructionally illuminating type. Our own exams should be that way as well. So in your careers, I would recommend taking part in when state ed is looking for volunteers to go up to Albany to help with the test creation. I would volunteer. And then you can say, yeah, I had something to do with that, and you can educate your colleagues and say, hey, I was up there, I worked on that test. Don't be bad-mouthing that test. Anyway, I like this graphic that I took from Popham's chapter. It gives a nice visual of the right and wrong way to teach to the test. Okay, teaching to the test equals teaching to the test items. Okay, this is one of the definitions that Popham says when people talk about, and I think I mentioned this, or I asked this question in the discussion board, which teaching to the test are you talking about? This is one thing. This is one way people refer to it, teaching to the test items. Okay. The other way is teaching to the curricular aim represented by the test. Okay. Popham says this is okay. So in the graphic, you have the teacher's instruction over here. It should not be directed towards a specific test of test items. Instead, it should be directed towards a body of knowledge and or skills, like our standards, okay, represented by a specific set of test items. So I like this, okay, because it shows, instead of going down here, this route, which many people do, you need to be going this route. Okay. All right. Contemplation. Which road are you going to take? Should I go to the right or should I go to the left? You know what you must do now, and what you should be doing, and you shouldn't be doing when it comes to test prep. Most of us already knew this. That being ethical or numbing the minds of young people is something that most of you know inherently. So my question is, what do you do when you have an unenlightened administrator who had never taken Dr. Tom's course and insists you get practice exam after practice exam? Okay, Popham recommends, and I agree, that you get closer to the fire. This means you get closer to your administrator. You say, okay, what can I do to help here? And of course, you have to follow the mandates, or you're going to get fired. All right. But what I think what I think you should do is to engage in what I call subversive teaching. When no one is looking, do what you know to be right, and then try to raise the awareness of the administrator by collaborating with him or her, rather than confronting them. All right, and you can do this as a whole school. That you need to know that good teaching will bring about good test scores if you're teaching to the standards. It makes sense, and it's going on in high functioning schools. So unlike Alfie says, these schools that are high functioning are not deadening kids, are not numbing them. They're teaching in a very effective way. So remember that, okay? Good teaching leads to high test scores. That's the secret. All right, let's talk about the discussion board this week. I'm only having one. Originally I'd have two, but I'm kind of trying to, wean you guys down so you can work on your papers. But I think the discussion boards are very important, right? In like last week's, it got me to see exactly how many people are getting out of this course what I wanted them to, and I was a little discouraged, but again, it at least got me to respond to you and say, hey, look at this, and what about this, and to get you to say, if teachers teach to their own tests, what's wrong with teaching to the curricular aims behind the test items of the state tests? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so anyway. To finish up, I'd like you to read the article that's in course materials. It's called I Teach to the Test. It's by a first-year teacher. I don't know if he got fired but I think he only taught 1 year. He only taught 1 year. And so he talks about his reaction about teaching to the test. So I want you to read that as a summarizer. And then I want you to incorporate all of that. I want you to incorporate what he said. I want you to incorporate what the test anxiety, the toughening up for the test article. So the discussion board is going to encompass all the text that I've mentioned. What I came out with, I found two what I thought were conflicting ways to do test prep. One was from Doug Reeves, who is a very well-known consultant in education today. He's well-written. He's written hundreds. He's written many textbooks. He's written many books, and he runs a consulting firm now that works with schools on improvement. And this is what he says. Even if the state test is dominated by low-level thinking skills, which is what Alfie said, right? The worst kind of tests, and questions are posed in a multiple-choice format, the best preparation for such tests is not mindless testing drills, but extensive student writing, accompanied by thinking, analysis, and reasoning. That's what Doug says. Now, I have attached this article by Kirchhoff and Newbill, who did I believe it was on the Ohio school districts. They did an extensive survey of how they increased student achievement. And one of the ways, amongst a lot of others, was about test prep. And this is what they said, that 3 of the most effective strategies are direct instruction and test-taking skills. Okay, I think Popham would be okay with that one. Extensive use of practice tests. Now, that fails the educational defensibility guidelines by Popham. An instructional practice altered to mirror form and content of the proficiency tests. In other words, change your practice so it looks like the tests. Again, that similar form instruction, Popham would probably disagree with that one as well. So you can see the conflict here. So I have 2 conflicting reports, and what I'll also I'll put the Kirchhoff and Newbill. It's like 50-something pages, but you can just look at the section on test prep, which is interesting. But what I want you to do is answer this question using all the documents mentioned. Okay, and that's toughening up for the test monsters. I teach to the test by the teacher talking about how he taught to the test when he was working. Matthew's article, which we read last week, High Expectations, No Excuses, which is Sharon Brittingham, who used test results to evaluate teachers. And then there's the National Education Association today's article, Breathe, Breathe, Release. Another article on schools reduce test stress through relaxation. And of course, Alfie, you can always throw him in, getting evaluation wrong. So use everything. So it's almost like a document-based essay where you have to, using all these documents and your knowledge of assessment, respond to these experts as to this difference of opinion here. So that's it. There's no, as I said, no DEJ. Hooray, hooray. Just a discussion board. So that's it.